They never said I didn't belong. They didn't have to. It was in the way my name was left off invitations, how my chair was always the last one set, how my achievements vanished beneath their toasts for others. I wasn't estranged. I was erased softly, politely, permanently. Until one night in a banquet filled with laughter and medals, a man in full military dress walked past the golden centerpieces, stopped in front of me, and saluted. The room fell silent. My family looked confused, but for the first time in my life, I didn't need to explain who I was. He already knew. It was a candid photo, warm lighting, raised glasses, laughter caught mid-motion, a celebration, a family united. The kind of image people frame in their living rooms or post with proud captions like grateful for every moment. My sister Olivia had uploaded it to her social media with some polished words about family and resilience. Everyone looked radiant. My parents standing proud in the center, Olivia glowing beside her husband Ethan, my brother Daniel in uniform smiling with performative ease. Even the table was set like a magazine shoot. Centerpieces, wine glasses, perfect symmetry. But I wasn't in it. What made it worse was knowing that I had been there. Not late, not in the corner, not invisible, yet somehow erased. I remembered what I wore that day. A muted blue dress, simple makeup. I'd even brought a bottle of wine that nobody opened. I'd taken the photo, actually. Olivia handed me her phone and asked, "Would you mind?" I didn't. I never did. I told myself I liked being the one who noticed rather than the one needing to be noticed. But seeing that picture posted days later, cropped, filtered with the caption, "Grateful for every blessing," I realized I wasn't even considered one. That wasn't the first time it happened, not the most obvious, just the most recent. When I was a child, I used to imagine myself as a side character in my own family story. The reliable one, the one who always remembered birthdays and brought extra napkins to cookouts. I didn't stand out. I didn't break rules or make headlines. I existed in the in-between Olivia's student body speeches and Daniel's police academy ceremonies. My parents had a way of presenting us like trophies on a shelf. Daniel was the protector, Olivia the diplomat. I was the quiet one, the helper. Not a disappointment exactly, just not enough to brag about. At school, I was smart, quiet smart, not valedictorian smart or scholarship banquet smart. Just good grades, clean record, never caused trouble. I liked puzzles, computers, systems that made sense when people didn't. But those achievements were never loud enough for the living room wall. Nobody knew what to do with a daughter whose skills couldn't be photographed. There's a strange kind of grief that comes from not being remembered for the good things you did. Not because you wanted applause, but because you thought maybe, just maybe, someone would notice. It's not like my family ever told me I wasn't enough. They didn't have to. It was in the pauses, the way my mother's eyes lit up when Olivia walked into a room, then settled into neutrality when I followed. The way my father introduced Daniel as our officer and Olivia as our rising star. And me as Claire, she's doing some tech thing. The silences hurt more than any insult could have. By the time I turned 35, I had already stopped trying to correct them. There was no point. Explaining my work was like reading code to someone who didn't care what the program did as long as it ran. I started showing up to family events like a contractor on standby. Present, helpful, invisible. That's why the photo hit me the way it did. It wasn't just a snapshot, it was a confirmation. Proof that in the narrative they'd constructed, I wasn't a main character. Maybe not even a supporting one, just someone who held the camera. And it wasn't rage that followed, not sadness either. Just a kind of soft, hollow ache. Like a rope slowly fraying over time. Not enough to snap, just enough to feel. My family worshipped symbols, titles, uniforms, plaques. Daniel wore his badge like armor. He joined the police force straight out of community college and quickly climbed ranks. Not because he was brilliant, but because he looked the part. Broad shoulders, sharp jaw. The kind of man people instinctively trusted, even if they shouldn't. My parents called him solid. Mom once said he made her feel safe, like the world was in order when he was around. Olivia, on the other hand, was elegance wrapped in achievement. She'd been winning since kindergarten. Debate team, Model UN, valedictorian, Georgetown on a full scholarship. She married Ethan, a Navy officer with more medals than expressions, and now worked in foreign affairs. Her hair was always perfectly set, her posture calculated, her voice modulated to impress. At family dinners, she never raised it. She didn't have to.
People leaned in to hear her. Then there was me, Claire, the oldest, the one who worked from home in soft sweaters, the one whose job had no business card and couldn't be summarized at dinner. Some tech thing, Dad said once dismissively when asked by a neighbor. She freelances, I think. I didn't correct him. It's not that I didn't want to, I just couldn't. My work involves sensitive infrastructure, cybersecurity, threat detection systems, simulated breach containment for government agencies. Most of it fell under black contracts. I signed NDAs that outlived presidential terms. There was no LinkedIn, no portfolio, no plaque on the wall, just encrypted emails, burner phones, midnight briefings. Once I spent 9 months developing a protocol to intercept a foreign ransomware scheme targeting US naval communication networks, my code stopped a multi-billion-dollar catastrophe from ever happening. No one ever knew. I got a one-line email from the Defense Office. Protocol C19 cleared. Exceptional discretion noted. That was it. That was my medal. But in my family, you couldn't hang discretion on the wall. You couldn't toast to classified deliverables. They didn't know what to do with someone whose greatest accomplishments had to stay secret. So they filled in the blanks. CLA just likes to work from home. She's really into computer stuff. She's kind of in her own world. And because I couldn't say otherwise, that version of me stuck. Mum was a retired principal. She believed in structure. Schedules, clear goals. If something wasn't testable, it wasn't valuable. My job to her looked like endless screen time and no promotions. Dad was a Navy man for 23 years. He saw life in hierarchies, commands, ranks, visible order. What he couldn't salute, he dismissed. So I faded. I let their myth stand. Sometimes I wondered if they truly didn't know, or if it was easier for them to believe the version where I was just drifting. It made their own stories shine brighter by comparison. But once during a National Defense Summit, I was invited quietly to receive internal recognition, a private room, 15 attendees, no cameras. A senior official handed me a plaque with no name on it, just a seal. He shook my hand and said, "You saved lives. We'll never print your name, but we'll never forget it either." I went home that night to a voicemail from Mum reminding me to RSVP for Daniel's promotion party. I didn't tell her where I'd been because that's what this life demands: silence, integrity, the ability to be proud without applause. But sometimes, like when I saw that family photo online, I wondered how long a person could go being invisible before they start believing they never existed in the first place. The first time I truly vanished was 2 counties away, bailing Daniel out after a DUI. It didn't make the papers, he made sure of that. But the officer on duty recognized my last name. "You Bennett's sister?" I nodded. "Figured," he said, handing me the paperwork. "You're the one who fixes things, huh?" I didn't reply. Daniel never brought it up. A week later, he posted a photo in uniform with the caption, "Grind never stops." The comments rolled in. Praise, admiration, people calling him a role model. I didn't like the post. I didn't comment. I just watched the algorithm polish his image while the truth disappeared beneath it. Then there was Olivia, a rising star with a spotless record until her final semester of grad school nearly broke her. Her fiancé, Ethan, was overseas. She called me past midnight, breathless, sobbing, apologizing for even reaching out. She hadn't started 2 of her final papers, and the deadline was in 3 days. "I can't think," she whispered. "I'll help," I said. I cleared my schedule, loaded her research files, mapped out thesis frameworks, and wrote with her line by line over 3 nights. I coached her through presentation slides, formatted citations, cleaned up syntax. She submitted both papers on time and graduated with distinction. During her commencement speech, she thanked Ethan for his unwavering support, her professors for their guidance, and her family for always believing in me. I was sitting in the back row. I clapped. Anyway, a few months later, Mum called me crying. She'd been denied coverage for a cardiac procedure. "It's going to cost more than we have," she said, voice tight. I don't know what to do. "You don't need to worry about it," I told her. I wired the money before she finished explaining the details. I moved funds from my long-term savings and never mentioned it again. When she recovered, she mailed Daniel a framed photo of her in the hospital bed, smiling, IV lines trailing from her arm. He posted it with the caption, "Glad I could be there for her." I never saw the frame. Dad's inbox was hacked once. He called in a panic, convinced someone was draining his pension or planting spyware. I drove to his house with my laptop, set up a secure router, cleaned his system, installed endpoint protection, and rewrote his passwords. It took 5 hours. He made me a sandwich and said, "You should teach high school. You're good at this tech stuff." Like I was doing card tricks, not patching holes in his digital life. The worst part wasn't the silence, it was the repackaging. They didn't just ignore what I did, they claimed it. Daniel was the hero cop, always composed under pressure. Olivia was the brilliant diplomat, calm in every crisis. My parents were the rocks, the foundation, and I was the techie one, the one who helped out when she could. That's how Mum described me to a neighbour once. Claire's a sweetheart, always helping everyone. Sweetheart, like I was a niece, not their daughter. Like I was a volunteer, not the one plugging every leak behind the scenes. Sometimes I wondered if they genuinely didn't see it. If they thought things just worked out because life smiled on them. Maybe they believed Daniel's DUI disappeared because of a good lawyer. Or Olivia's graduation came from sheer brilliance. Or Mum's hospital bills were lucky timing. Or maybe they knew. Maybe they knew and just preferred the cleaner version of the story. The one where their perfect children never stumbled, and the eldest daughter didn't have to be extraordinary, just useful. And like always, I let them. Years ago, I was offered a position abroad. It was a high role stationed at a European cybersecurity hub, working directly with international agencies. The pay was triple, the title impressive. It would have been my first time living outside the US, and the office overlooked a canal. I said no. Olivia had just gotten engaged. Daniel was going through a messy transfer. Dad's health was starting to slip. Mum pretended she could still run everything like she was 25. No one asked me to stay, but I stayed anyway. I told the agency I needed to prioritize personal commitments. They didn't push. People like me weren't supposed to be emotional. It wasn't until years later, sitting alone in my apartment, scrolling through pictures from Olivia's wedding, that I felt the sharpness of that decision. Not regret, just clarity. I'd folded myself smaller so everyone else could spread out, and they never even noticed. One of the worst moments came not long after. Olivia invited me to a formal networking gala she was hosting through her embassy connections. It was a sleek affair. Blacked ties, soft jazz, clinking glasses, career climbers orbiting each other like polished satellites. I stood beside Olivia at the bar when an older woman approached. "Oh, you must be her sister," she smiled. Olivia blinked. "Oh no," she said quickly, shaking her head. "Claire's just a family friend. She helps out sometimes." I didn't react. The woman apologized, said something polite, and drifted away. Olivia never looked at me, never explained, just ordered another drink and asked if I could check on the AV system. They were having trouble with the projector. I fixed it without a word. That night, I went home, deleted every photo I'd taken at her wedding from my phone, not out of anger, just because I didn't want to pretend anymore. Daniel, in his own way, was no better. He hid behind bluster and bourbon. At family barbecues, he always had a beer in hand and a loud story ready to go. One evening, he drank more than usual. The backyard lights flickered as music blared from a speaker. He leaned against the porch railing, swaying slightly, and said to a group of co-workers I'd never met, "Claire, oh, she's the fail-safe. We pull her out when things fall apart. Laughter, not cruel, not loud, just casual, like I was a toolkit, not a person. Then, as if it was the most normal thing in the world, he added, "She only exists when we need something." I felt my spine tighten. He didn't mean it to hurt. That was the worst part. He thought it was funny, clever. Even I slipped away from the party, sat in my car for half an hour before driving home. I didn't confront him. I never did. Because what would I say? You can't demand value from people who don't know how to measure yours. You can't teach recognition to those who prefer revision. That was the pattern. I made their lives easier, quieter, smoother. And in return, I became background noise, a placeholder, a reliable resource, not a person with pride or limits or a breaking point. Sometimes I fantasized about what it would look like if I left. Really left, changed my number, moved to that European job, disappeared from the family chat. Maybe they'd finally notice the shape of the space I used to fill. But I never did, because despite everything, some small, stubborn part of me still believed that love meant staying, even when no one saw you, even when they looked you in the eye and mistook you for furniture. The email came on a Wednesday afternoon. Subject: line, Captain Cole, promotion dinner confirmation. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam. The sender wasn't anyone I recognized, just a catering service using a Gmail address. I opened it anyway. Inside was a polite message confirming final headcount, menu selections, and arrival instructions for a private military banquet. It was addressed to a Carla Bennett. I blinked. My full name, Claire Bennett, wasn't even listed in the to field, but my email address was. I scrolled down curious. It listed venue details, security protocols, and an RSVP deadline. Right at the bottom, honoring the promotion of Captain Ethan Cole, United States Navy. My stomach dropped. Ethan, my brother-in-law, Olivia's husband. I hadn't heard about any promotion. I searched my messages. No invite, no text from Olivia, nothing in the family group chat, which at this point was more of a ghost town to me anyway, but still nothing. I clicked back to the email and stared at the line. Please confirm attendance no later than Friday. It wasn't even meant for me. A wrong name, a wrong address, just a digital hiccup. But it found me. For a moment, I considered forwarding it to Olivia. Looks like this came to me by mistake. I could write casually, like it didn't sting, like it didn't confirm what I'd suspected for years. That I was no longer counted, no longer considered. That events moved forward and names were tallied, and mine didn't even make the spreadsheet. I didn't send it. Instead, I sat there, fingers hovering over the keys, the glow of the screen making the absence louder. It wasn't an oversight, not really. Oversights have context. This was precision, a clean cut, the kind of exclusion that doesn't leave a mark, just a space you weren't expected to fill. I didn't cry. I wish I had. Crying would have given the moment shape, pain. But what I felt was quieter, a kind of empty acknowledgement, like opening a gift box to find it hollow. It wasn't just about the dinner, it was about the pattern. The baby shower I wasn't invited to, though every cousin and neighbour was. The housewarming I found out about through a tagged Instagram story. The Christmas Eve brunch that never came with an invite twice. Each time there was a reason, a glitch, a delay, an excuse. This time there was silence. I sat at my kitchen table and read the email again, letting it be what it was, proof. Not just of being forgotten, but of having been erased so thoroughly that even a mistake couldn't bring me back in. They didn't forget to include me. They had moved on without checking if I was worth including. It should have made me furious, but instead I felt still, not broken, not surprised, just confirmed. The reality had been creeping in for years, soft-footed, wearing the disguise of busyness, of logistics, of misunderstandings. Now it stood fully formed, wearing a name tag and asking if I wanted chicken or fish. I closed my laptop and let the silence stretch. There would be a dinner, a celebration, toasts, uniforms, speeches about duty and honour. Olivia in a dress that matched the table settings, my parents beaming like extras in a promotional video, Daniel probably with another drink rehearsing a toast about family pride, and I would not be there because I was never really supposed to be. I didn't reply to the email, I didn't text Olivia, I didn't mention it to anyone. I simply archived the message and opened a secure folder on my desktop. The absurdity wasn't lost on me that while my name was missing from the dinner list, it was embedded in the metadata of the very system Ethan was being honored for. He was receiving a promotion for implementing a new naval communication protocol. I had written half of it, not directly, of course. My work was buried in layers of clearance and encrypted code. But the framework, the fail-safes, the logic trees that prevented signal manipulation, mine, hidden fingerprints on a system they didn't even know had once been on fire. The irony was almost poetic. That night, I reviewed a document marked urgent, a weekly audit of threat simulations and breach drills. It included Ethan's division, highlighted in yellow. My eyes scanned the lines automatically until something caught. A line of code within the communication bridge script. It was subtle, almost elegant. Whoever had planted it had done so with surgical precision. It was a dormant back door. In plain terms, it meant a skilled enough actor could mimic signal authority within the network. They could override commands, issue false orders, disable or reroute units without detection. If activated during a deployment, it would have caused chaos. And the man at the center of the program, the newly minted Captain Cole, would have been held responsible. I stared at the screen. No one else had flagged it. Maybe they hadn't seen it. Maybe they hadn't known what they were looking for. But I did. Part of me paused just for a second, not out of
vengeance, but clarity. If I said nothing, no one would trace it back to me. I wasn't listed, I wasn't invited. I didn't exist in that narrative. If the system failed, it would unravel publicly. Ethan's name would be at the center. My silence could let the world see what happened when they wrote me out. But I didn't. I didn't pause the audit or forward a red flag. I opened a separate terminal, launched a patch, rewrote the compromised segment, simulated the repair, validated stability, and logged the correction under anonymous override clearance. The file closed with a quiet beep. Ethan would never know. No one would. The glitch would vanish like so many others I'd handled before. Unnoticed, unnamed, but necessary. I leaned back in my chair, eyes heavy, throat tight. There wouldn't be an award. There wouldn't be a speech. There wouldn't even be a thank you. But the system would hold. The mission would proceed. The ceremony would shine. He would stand tall in his uniform. My parents would toast to his brilliance. Olivia would beam, dressed like a portrait. And I would be the silent signature beneath the success. That night, I sat at my kitchen counter with cold tea and let the weight of it settle. Not the betrayal, not the absence. The truth that I could disappear from the picture and still hold it all together. It wasn't justice, it wasn't vindication, but it was enough for now. The invitation came 2 days before the event. Another group text from Olivia with a flyer-style image attached. Join us for a private dinner in celebration of Olivia's birthday. Dressed to impress? It was signed with balloons and a champagne emoji. There was no personal message, just my name included. As if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't been absent from every other gathering in the past 2 years. I stared at it for a long time before responding with a simple, "I'll be there." It wasn't curiosity that made me go. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was something sharper. Clarity, maybe. I wanted to see if they would look me in the eye now that Ethan had saluted me across a room full of decorated guests. I wanted to know if that single gesture had cracked the image they'd clung to for so long. The banquet hall was pristine. Gold accents, linen-draped tables, centerpieces of white roses. It was the kind of place you book to impress, not connect. I arrived early, wearing black, simple, tailored, clean. No jewelry, no accessories, just the facts. When I walked in, no one turned. My mother spotted me first. Her expression flickered before she smoothed it into a pleasant mask and crossed the room with measured steps. "You made it," she said with a tone that carried equal parts surprise and inconvenience. "Just don't make this about you, okay? It's her night." She didn't wait for a response. She moved on like a hostess managing seating charts. I found my place card at the far edge of the room near a serving station and a potted plant, a small table meant for overflow. The head table, elevated, spotlighted, was reserved for Olivia, Ethan, our parents, and a few noteworthy guests. I was seated with a distant cousin I hadn't seen in 10 years, and someone from Olivia's office who didn't recognize me. I didn't mind the isolation. The music played softly. Champagne flutes clinked. Guests posed for photos in front of a branded backdrop. I sipped water and waited. Daniel arrived fashionably late, already mid-story as he entered. His voice boomed above the soft ambiances, and people laughed out of habit. He spotted me as he passed and gave a nod like we were coworkers at a forced reunion. "Well, look who made it out of her apartment," he said, loud enough for 3 surrounding tables to hear. Deadbeat made it after all. Laughter rippled. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I didn't give him the satisfaction. He raised his glass like it was a joke between old friends, then walked off before I could respond. Not that I planned to. That was Daniel's power. He made cruelty seem like charisma. The others followed his lead. Not outright hostility, just the kind of social exclusion you couldn't prove. No eye contact, no follow-up questions, no "how have you been?" I existed in the room the way lighting does. Functional, unnoticed, expected. And yet I stayed because something inside me needed to see it through. I wasn't hoping for redemption. I wasn't expecting an apology. I just needed to see in full light what I had been pretending not to see for years. That I didn't belong. Not because I lacked value, but because my value required too much effort for them to understand. The music paused just as the double doors swung open. Ethan entered like a headline. Pressed whites, gleaming metals, posture carved from discipline. He was late, intentionally so. That kind of entrance was rehearsed, calculated, heads turned, conversations halted mid-sentence. Someone whispered,
"Captain Cole," with a note of awe. I watched him from my corner, half expecting him to walk straight to the head table, kiss Olivia on the cheek, shake hands with my father, and give my mother a polite nod. That was the pattern. That was how it always worked. I assumed no, knew I would be invisible to him, just like to the rest of them. He scanned the room once casually. His eyes swept over the guests, the arrangement, the gilded decor, and landed directly, unexpectedly, on me. And then he moved, not towards the head table, not towards Olivia, but towards me. It took a second for people to notice. The music hadn't resumed yet, and the lull stretched just long enough for whispers to emerge. A few chairs shifted. Someone near me stiffened. As he approached, his boots echoing softly across the floor. The space around my table grew tense. He stopped directly in front of me. Everyone was watching. He didn't speak at first. He stood at full height, posture rigid, chin lifted, arms precise. And then without hesitation, he raised his hand in a formal military salute. Clean, deliberate, loud, without a sound. "Mom," he said, his voice firm enough to carry across the hall. A fork clinked against a plate. Someone inhaled audibly. Olivia from the head table froze mid-con conversation. My father blinked like his brain had skipped a beat. My mother's face lost its composure for the first time in years. I stood not out of instinct, but necessity. My body moved before my mind caught up. I didn't return the salute. Civilians don't, but I nodded once. He lowered his hand, offered a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes, and asked, "May I sit?" I gestured to the empty chair beside me, and just like that, the entire room tilted. I wasn't the ghost anymore. I wasn't the helper or the invisible eldest. I was the woman Ethan Cole, a decorated naval officer, had chosen to publicly acknowledge in a room full of people who had never bothered. The silence lasted longer than it should have. Conversations resumed slowly, like a film restarting after a freeze frame, but quieter, wearier. A few people whispered behind napkins. One guest, seated across the room, kept glancing over like trying to reassemble a puzzle with missing pieces. Olivia stood eventually, graceful as ever, and made her way towards us. Her expression was composed, but her smile didn't quite land. "You made it," she said to Ethan, hand on his shoulder, her voice too bright. "Wouldn't miss it?" he replied, eyes still forward. She didn't look at me, not once. After a beat, she returned to her seat at the head table. The tension in her shoulders betrayed her poise. My father watched us from a distance, his usual command absent from his stare. He looked like a man processing a data breach, something unexpected in a system he thought he understood. Daniel, still clinging to his drink, tried to recover with a joke about the cake being dry. "Like government work," he said loudly. No one laughed. Not this time. Ethan didn't explain himself. He didn't need to. His presence beside me was enough. A silent manifesto, a statement without elaboration. We didn't talk much after that. He asked if I was still working the impossible, and I nodded. I asked if he'd adjusted to his new command, and he shrugged like it didn't matter. It wasn't about the words. The room shifted around us, recalibrating. People approached more cautiously now. The polite indifference they once used on me was replaced by a subtle curiosity they couldn't name. I had become a question they didn't have the answer to, and the irony, I didn't owe them one. The silence didn't break, it stretched. Even after Ethan took his seat beside me and conversation slowly restarted, a hum of unease lingered like smoke. Forks scraped plates, glasses clink-ticked, but the sound felt hollow. Chatter without rhythm, laughter without commitment. People kept stealing glances, then looking away, unsure of what they'd just witnessed. Across the room, my mother stood stiff at the end of the dessert table, pretending to adjust flower arrangements. She didn't look towards me once, not even out of habit. Her mouth moved as she spoke to someone in a navy blue blazer, but her eyes flickered, nervous, darting, trying not to settle. Olivia was worse. Composure had always been her superpower. She'd weathered political panels, embassy receptions, debates broadcasted live. But tonight, a fissure ran through her smile. She played hostess like a woman clinging to choreography, making rounds with rehearsed warmth. But I saw it, the crack behind the eyes, the careful calculation of each step she took, each glance she avoided. She didn't approach me again. Instead, she sent someone, one of her colleagues from the Foreign Affairs Office, a tall man with a polite face and a badge clipped to his coat. He brought over a slice of cake. "Olivia asked me to make sure you got some," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "She couldn't bring it herself." He chuckled awkward. "She's a little overwhelmed." I took the plate without a word. He hovered a second too long before retreating beside me. Ethan didn't comment. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered. Olivia was trying to regain control, one passive gesture at a time. Cake as smiles, distance, recalibration. I ate in silence. The slice was lemon with raspberry filling, unnecessarily complex. Daniel passed by once more, but the swagger had drained from him. He didn't speak, didn't raise his glass. He just nodded once, then found another group to perform for, one that wouldn't question his punchlines. It was fascinating watching the room adjust itself. Like a living organism shifting around a disturbance, I had become a disruption, one they hadn't accounted for, didn't know how to digest. For years, I had built my existence around the belief that invisibility was strength, that keeping the peace meant keeping quiet, that love looked like shrinking so others could feel tall. But tonight, I didn't have to say anything. My silence didn't mean surrender anymore, it meant power, presence, and they could feel it. My mother left early. She touched Olivia's arm and gently, whispered something in her ear, and exited through the side-geared door without ever once acknowledging my existence. That was fine. The old me would have been gutted by it, would have wondered what I did wrong, what else I could have done. But now I simply watched her go with the same detachment one gives to a stranger forgetting your name, because that's what she'd made me, a stranger. And yet the one who remained beside me wasn't a stranger at all. Ethan stayed through dessert, through the speeches, through the slow emptying of the hall. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a signal, loud and lasting. I didn't explain anything to him, and for once someone didn't ask. The air shifted long after the lights dimmed and the final toast was made. People shuffled out in clusters, voices lower now, like the night itself had asked them to reconsider everything they thought they knew. I stood by the side deck, coat over my arm, waiting for the rideshare I had already called. Ethan had vanished into a brief conversation with AS Superior, one of the few people in the room who hadn't flinched at his salute. I didn't need him to say goodbye, he'd done more than enough. That's when Daniel approached. He wasn't drunk, not entirely. His gait was steady, his tone uncharacteristically muted. "Hey," he said, hands tucked into his pockets. I didn't respond right away. I waited, studying his face. He cleared his throat. "So, you and Ethan talk much?" "A strange opening. We talk when it matters," I replied. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the ground like it had answers. "Didn't know you two, knew each other like that." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean respectfully?" He winced a little. "Yeah, that there was a silence between us, dense and overdue." Then, in a tone I couldn't quite place, Daniel said, "I didn't mean what I said at the party about you only existing when we need something." I didn't move. "I was drunk," he added quickly, as if that helped. "That's the thing about being drunk," I said. "It doesn't create the truth. It just makes you say it out loud." He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. Instead, he nodded again slowly, as if the words were sinking into a place he rarely visited. "I don't really know what you do," he admitted. "You don't need to." He met my eyes for the first time that night, not with defiance or arrogance, but a glimmer of something else, awareness, maybe even regret. Still, he said, "I see you now." Just wanted to say that. Then he turned and walked away. I didn't say anything back because for once the silence belonged to me. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed, heels kicked off, dress unzipped halfway, when my phone buzzed. It was Olivia. The text was short, unpunctuated. "What do you actually do for work?" No context, no hi, no follow-up from the dinner, no apology, just the question dropped like bait in a pond, as if curiosity could act as a bridge, as if she deserved access because she finally noticed there was a locked door. I stared at the message. Once I would have responded, I would have softened, explained things in digestible bits, tried to make her feel comfortable in the face of her own ignorance. But not now. Now I understood the difference between being kind and being complicit. I deleted the message, not out of cruelty, out of ownership, because I no longer owed anyone a version of me that made them feel safe. I lay back, the room quiet, except for the soft buzz of the city outside. For the first time in a long while, I didn't replay the evening, didn't second-guess my reactions, or wonder what I could have done differently. Instead, I thought of that moment when Ethan walked towards me, the weight of the room shifting, the shock in my mother's eyes, the crack in Olivia's composure, Daniel's sudden restraint. It had taken one gesture, one acknowledgement, not a speech, not a reveal, just a salute, and that had been enough to unsettle the entire narrative they'd constructed without me. I didn't need to explain who I was. They were already starting to realize who I wasn't. And that was the beginning. The message started trickling in 3 days after the dinner. First, a group text from my mother. "Easter brunch at our place, Sunday at 11, potluck style. Hope everyone can make it. Love, Mum," a winking emoji at the end, the kind she used when trying to be playful, usually after saying something barbed. The invite came with a flyer she'd clearly made on Canva. Pastel eggs, cartoon tulips, smiling bunnies, like nothing had ever happened. I didn't respond, not with a thanks, not with a can't make it, not even with a reaction emoji. 3 days later, Daniel followed up in a separate message. "Hey, hope you can come. Mum's going all out. You know how she gets." I stared at the screen. The tone was light, brotherly, like he was pretending the last decade hadn't existed, like he hadn't turned me into a punchline more times than I could count. I let the message sit. Then I archived it. The following evening, Olivia reached out. "It would be nice to see you again. I think things are settling. Maybe we can just move forward." No apology, no acknowledgement of the cracks she helped carve. Just a diplomatic olive branch, lightly extended, minimally risked. I didn't bite. This was the difference now. Once I would have jumped at the chance to be included. I would have read her message 5 times, crafting the perfect neutral reply. I would have shown up, brought a dish, smiled too much, accepted every casual jab like it was currency I had to pay to be present. But I wasn't hungry for their invitations anymore. I was full. The next day, another message arrived, this one from my mother again. "I feel like things have gotten tense. Let's just all come together. We don't need to rehash the past." That phrase, "we don't need to rehash the past," struck me like a cracked bell. As if the past was some abstract inconvenience, a wrinkle in an otherwise smooth photo album. As if healing could happen without admission. What they wanted was my participation, not my truth. So I gave them neither. The silence wasn't passive. It wasn't avoidance. It was deliberate. A boundary forged in the quiet, heavy with meaning. I wasn't angry. I wasn't punishing them. I was simply done performing for a stage that never gave me a mic. The days passed. The thread stayed active. Photos appeared. Olivia posing with the tulip centerpieces. Daniel flipping something on the grill. My father giving a toast, likely about family being everything. I wasn't mentioned, but I was felt in the spaces between their words, in the way my absence now carried weight. I imagine they whispered about it. "Do you think she's mad? Maybe she just needed space. She's always been dramatic." But they knew. Deep down, they knew. They had spent years crafting a narrative where I was convenient only in my quiet. And when that quiet became clarity, they didn't know what to do. I spent Easter morning walking the old part of town, past the river trail where the trees had just started to bloom, past the federal complex with its blank facade and guarded entrance. No one ever asked what went on in there, but I knew that building held more of my identity than any family photo ever had. I paused at a coffee cart, ordered a drink, sat on a bench in the sun, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel left out. I felt free because silence, when chosen, is not emptiness, it's power. The question came on a Wednesday during a routine audit review with a junior analyst named Raya. She was smart, sharp in the way younger recruits often are when they still believe excellence guarantees recognition. We were finishing up our 4th straight hour cross-referencing server logs when she leaned back in her chair and said, "Without much ceremony, can I ask you something personal?" I looked up mildly surprised. "You just did." She smiled, then hesitated. "Okay, serious question." I nodded. "Do you ever feel invisible?" The words hung there for a moment, flat and quiet. I let them settle. Let the silence breathe. Ria didn't backpedal. She waited. She wasn't asking out of nosiness. It wasn't small talk. There was something real behind her eyes, like she was looking for a version of herself in me, like she feared what I might confirm. I leaned back, folded my arms. "No," I said, her brows lifted in gentle surprise. "I used to," I continued, "but not anymore." "No," Raya tilted her head. "What changed?" I tapped my pen against the desk once, twice, then stopped. I stopped mistaking silence for absence, I said. Stopped confusing their lack of acknowledgement with a lack of value. She didn't say anything, just sat very still, the kind of stillness that meant she heard every syllable. "I'm not invisible," I added. "They just never learned how to see." Ria blinked a few times, then looked away, nodding slowly like the truth had caught her off guard. She didn't ask anything else for the rest of the meeting. She didn't need to. After she left, I turned back to my screen. My inbox had a flagged message waiting, an encrypted file marked confidential, shared through an internal secure line I rarely used anymore. It came from a naval contact I'd worked with twice before, never directly. The sender's name was obscured, the file title vague, but the signature at the bottom of the digital slip caught me immediately, EOL. I opened it slowly, scrolling past the redacted blocks and access warnings. The file was a post-mission summary from a recent cyber operations overhaul, one that Ethan had overseen as part of his new command. Halfway through the document, there was a single page, brief and understated, titled Acknowledgements. There was only one name on it for CB, without whom this framework would not hold. My fingers paused on the trackpad. There was no full name, no explanation, no context. Just that line tucked into a secure, unseen page of a document that only a handful of people would ever read. But I knew what it meant. He hadn't said anything at the dinner. He hadn't brought it up after. He never texted or called or asked for favors again. But this was a kind of recognition that meant more than applause. It was deliberate, precise, personal, and private. No ceremony, no podium, no toast. Just one man using the only place he had access to the system to etch my contribution where it couldn't be deleted, even if no one else understood what it meant. I sat there for a long time, just staring at it, not smiling, not crying, just still. Because in that moment, the truth took shape. Not for them, not even for Ethan, but for me. I had spent so long waiting to be seen, thinking the light had to come from outside, that someone had to point at me and say she matters. But I didn't need the spotlight anymore because I had already written myself into the foundation. Raya's question echoed back then. Do you ever feel invisible? And the answer settled in my chest like a quiet drumbeat. Not anymore. The building stood silent as it always had, no sign, no flag, no plaque, just grey stone and mirrored glass flanked by 2 trimmed hedges, and a security booth manned by guards who didn't smile. If you didn't know what it was, you wouldn't think it mattered. Just another federal box tucked behind the river trail, half forgotten by the city's expansion. But I knew better. I'd walked past it 100 times over the years, usually without stopping, always with purpose, always mid-cool, always dressed like I didn't belong anywhere specific. But today, I slowed. It had been nearly a decade since I first entered that building. At the time, I was 29 and unsure of everything. They'd given me a code name, an office without windows, and a series of protocols so convoluted it took me 2 weeks to decipher what I was even supposed to fix. The servers were fragile, the firewalls outdated, the architecture held together by tape and prayer. And beneath all that, buried like rot in a foundation, was the breach. I didn't tell anyone at first. I needed to be sure. So I stayed late and slept at my desk, rewrote entire modules just to test their integrity. I found the entry point, isolated the vulnerability, and patched it without raising an alarm. When I submitted the final report, my supervisor read it twice. Then he said simply, "We didn't even know how broken we were." There was no press release, no round of applause, just a shift in the system, like a tremor that never made the news, but quietly prevented an earthquake. That was my legacy, not something loud, not something framed, but something that held. As I stood across the street now, older, quieter, I realized I had become like the building itself, unmarked, uncelebrated, and essential. A man walked by with a coffee, not even glancing at the entrance. A cyclist coasted past without slowing down. The world spun around the place like it didn't exist, and still it stood. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it. I already knew what it would be. Another forwarded thread from a cousin. Another family photo from a barbecue I hadn't attended. Another reminder that I was no longer a participant in their narrative. It didn't sting like it used to. Because some stories don't need to be rewritten, they just need to be stepped away from. I crossed the street slowly, not to go inside, but to see the glass from another angle. It reflected the sky not perfectly, but in fragments. Broken bits of blue and cloud rearranged depending on where you stood. That too felt like me. People saw different versions of who I was depending on the light, the distance, the angle. To my family, I'd been the help, the afterthought for thought, the one with too much time on her hands. To the systems I protected, I was the fail-safe. To the people I worked with, I was the one who made things work when everything was about to fall apart. None of those were lies, but none of them were the whole truth either. A memory surfaced then, quiet, but clear. My first day in that building, I'd stood in the hallway, badge clipped on wrong. Too many questions, too few answers. A man in uniform passed me without a glance, and I'd thought, I'll never belong here. But I had made the place safer, and it had made me solid. I turned to leave, hands in my coat pockets, the wind brushing past like a nod of recognition. I didn't look back, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't have to. Some legacies aren't built to be seen, they're built to endure. The message came late at night, long after I'd settled into the quiet of my apartment, long after the world had gone still and the city had exhaled its noise into sleep. It was from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, Lena. We used to sit next to each other at holiday dinners, whispering jokes during long prayers, sneaking cookies before dessert. She drifted from me over time, not out of malice, just momentum. Everyone had their orbit, and mine had slowly pulled away. The photo came first, a casual shot from what looked like another family gathering. Outdoor table, paper plates, plastic cutlery, familiar faces frozen mid-laugh. My father standing with a fork in one hand, gesturing as if making a point. Daniel at the grill, Olivia pouring wine. I wasn't in it, I wasn't surprised. But this time, the omission felt different because this time, the message wasn't just the photo. It was the sentence that followed. They started joking again about you not showing up, about how you probably forgot. Then Ethan said something. He cut them off, said, "She does real work." Loud, like he meant it. No one said anything after that. I read it twice, then again. The words weren't elaborate, they weren't flowery or emotional, just plain truth delivered plainly. She does real work. That was all it took. Not a speech, not a confrontation, just a single sentence with enough weight to steal a room. I could see it in my mind. Olivia frozen, glass in hand, my mother blinking as if caught off guard, Daniel with a smirk fading too fast, and Ethan standing there not angry, just firm, the man who had once saluted me without fanfare, doing it again now, this time with words instead of posture, and once again the narrative cracked. Only this time I wasn't there to see it. And that somehow made it even more powerful. Because I didn't need to be. I didn't reply to Lena's message, not because I didn't appreciate it, not because it didn't matter, but because I didn't need it to define me. I sat back on my couch, phone face down on the coffee table, and let the quiet wrap around me like a well-worn coat. For years, I had chased recognition like it was oxygen, essential, elusive. I'd waited for the thank yous that never came, the apologies that stayed locked behind pride. I'd measured my worth against their understanding and always came up short. But not anymore. Now I understood something else, something quieter but stronger. That value doesn't require visibility, that truth doesn't need validation to remain true, that some legacies aren't built for stories or songs or speeches. They're built in silence, in the systems that hold, in the bridges that don't collapse, in the people who walk away, not out of defeat, but because they finally understand that the room they've been knocking on was never the one they needed to enter. Later that week, a neighbor asked if I had plans for the upcoming holiday. I smiled and said I was thinking of taking a trip. Just me, no itinerary, no reason, just a map and a quiet place where the world didn't need me to be anything but myself. She nodded. That sounds peaceful. It would be. And more than that, it would be mine. As I packed that night, I came across an old photo, one from a birthday party when I was 10. In it, Olivia wore a crown, Daniel had cake on his nose, and I was in the corner, blurry, holding a tray of drinks. I smiled, not with bitterness, but with recognition. That girl had always been there, not invisible, just ahead of her time. I slipped the photo back into its box and zipped up my bag. No one would know where I was going, no one needed to, because finally I wasn't moving for them. I was moving for me. And as I locked the door behind me, I whispered the truth I'd come to understand so fully now. Some legacies don't need a name, they just need to be